sort of don't think of as being also a place where kind of normal human things like this could emerge.
Normal rivalries. I want to ask you about liberal feminism. There's several points in your book where you're critical of it, and you write very movingly of the Bethnal Green girls and say that you were struck by how the most noxious things that were said about those girls were said by other women, women who were otherwise identified as liberal feminists. What do you think the dynamic at play is there, and do you think Western liberal feminism has failed these women?
I think it certainly failed those girls because it didn't intersect enough with their lives to be able to really view them as girl victims. It reminded me, in the UK we had a string of stories in recent years about girls in northern cities in Britain who were sort of groomed into these sexual grooming networks and sort of kept by men for years, abused and exploited. And there was a sort of national outcry at how this could have gone on. How could no one have noticed? The police, the social workers. And many of the dynamics were simply the same. Very vulnerable young teenage girls being persuaded, don't tell your parents about what I'm going to do to you. The kind of classic behavior of an exploiter or a sexual exploiter of a young woman. And the parallels to this, to my mind, were immediate and obvious, but, these girls were just simply victims, and these girls were accomplices to their own exploitation, and the only difference was their background, their religious and racial background. So I think that led to a sort of any permission or acknowledgement that they too could be victims. And I think that more widely, there's a real kind of tension within liberal, white, Western feminism around what to do with religion and Islam and women who are religious. Can they, precisely the kind of tensions that ISIS was exploiting, is there such a thing as Islamic feminism? Can you seek gender justice within a context or a movement that is deeply religious and orthodox in its own way? So I think we haven't really, I think those are challenging conversations, and we were talking about Tunisia earlier. Why were young women, radical, revolutionary young women, seeking change or empowerment through what we would see from a Western vantage as a sort of orthodox or exclusionary even movement? How do we make sense of young women like Noor, who were part of a movement that petitioned and would have protests in front of Tunisian universities to be able to sit for classes wearing a face veil? It's sort of seeking inclusion, but from a space of such otherness. And it's I think very complex to sort of figure out how to engage and think about women who are seeking maybe not even gender equality, but gender justice. And do they count as feminists? Are they to be supported? Are they to be criticized? I think we don't have enough of these thorny conversations.
On that point, you talk about how in Britain, and particularly with the coverage of the Bethnal Green girls, that there was a tension between making sense of it all and trying to understand it, and that being too dangerously close to sympathising with these girls, and we couldn't have that. Did you develop or have any sympathy for your subjects as you reported on them over many, many years?
Some of them a great deal. Some of them a great deal, and it was very hard to, at many moments, kind of be careful to not over-empathize. I think part of the challenge of this book was that these women were the most dehumanized kind of political subjects of certainly the last decade. Very little empathy at all for what could have led them to take these decisions. And so the sort of impulse to perhaps overcorrect was something that I had to be really vigilant for. But there were some who were very clearly, desolate, tragic stories. The young woman Lena, for example, that I mentioned from the abused home. Some much less so, I have to say. Some. and perhaps, this is something that happens in war, but, I remember there was a Syrian woman that I met in one of these camps who had, detention camps. She had just escaped Raqqa, and she was so blithe, she knew the right things to say, but in a moment she would sort of turn and say, this camp is so, they don't serve vegetables here, and there's no fish, and had no sense, I think, really of the sort of most horrific aspects of a group that she had been a part of what they had done. So I think some, in the end, and perhaps they had, emerged from a society that was so fractured that the other side was dehumanized by both sides, which again is understandable to me, but is much harder to then sympathize with an individual who, so easily dehumanizes others.
That brings to mind to me the Australian women and children who are still over there in refugee camps in Syria, and I'm sure some of the audience members will have followed their story. A lot of those women, particularly when they've appeared in the media, there's this real feeling amongst, I think, the public of like, are you sorry enough? Were you a victim or were you an accomplice? And you need to tell us, because otherwise we're not going to help you. What do you think? Nonetheless, it is a very thorny issue for the Australian government. Do they help these women and children get out, or do they leave them there to essentially rot? And I think probably the public would be behind them if they did so, unfortunately. What do you think is the most prudent course of action for the government with these Australian women and children? I know you didn't actually meet any of them in the camps, but you will know their stories, I think.
I've met some of the families, and I visited the camp or the detention centre where they're being held. I spent a lot of time working on this issue because, of course, ISIS is over, but country to country, societies and governments are dealing with exactly this question. What do we do with our women and children nationals who are there, who were affiliated in some way? I think it's just really crucial to not view them all as a monolith. Because there are so many different experiences and backgrounds and ways through which women ended up there. Some were genuinely coerced or in positions where they didn't have a lot of choice. Some less so. And I think a policy that recognizes that sort of varying level of experience, and also, an awareness of the different roles women played in ISIS. Some women were very much involved in perpetrating violence, and some women were very much as we were speaking earlier, immediately repented or regretted, tried to escape and had their children taken away, tried to escape and were abused. So the sort of picture of victimhood, the sort of role of perpetrator and victim can be mixed in one woman's experience, or it can be very much tilted to one sort of side or the other. And then, of course, there are many innocent children who did not choose to be taken there and did not choose to be born into such a situation, and are living in a place that is like an ISIS detention center, because there are women in there who are still fervent ISIS supporters who, stab camp guards, and there's no access to any kind of healthcare or any kind of medicine. The water is polluted. It is a nightmarish place. So in the end, I think states do have, of course, a duty to keep their citizens at home safe. I think it's important to acknowledge that. But also are capable of differentiating within or amongst their citizens who are there. They can bring back those who are deemed not risky at all, or very little risk, and who are the most vulnerable, and of course the children. So I think there's a quite kind of nuanced set of responses that are possible for governments that would be in line with even security concerns, because I think, there are a lot of arguments across Europe, and I heard this, that bringing women back and keeping an eye on them, prosecuting them, is in a way much safer than sort of allowing 13,000 women and children to remain in this sort of no man's land part of Syria, where they can escape, they can cross back into their home countries undetected. So for a whole sort of myriad of reasons, there are smarter and more targeted ways of dealing with repatriation that can be humane and can start with those that are just kind of a no-brainer. Someone who your intelligence agencies know is not going to be a threat and who is deeply suffering and who has 3 children, simply should be brought home.
It must be nice to be back and welcomed
It's
as
lovely.
one of us.
It's lovely. It's so warm because, you know, in a way, well, it's quite frightening, that moment when you're about to walk on a stage. And that's a lovely welcome. And I'm excited to be here again. It remains the biggest thrill of my life, you know, actually to be on the stage of the Opera House.
And it's called The People's House, and, you know, it is a great format to be able to have a chat. So welcome, everybody, and let's start. I read this lovely greeting to you in your Instagram account, and it was one of many in a similar vein. And this person says, I want to thank you for all you've given the world via your food, personality, and lust for things yummy and delightful. This is a line of work that genuinely brings people joy, isn't it?
But it's also so fantastic to have, you know, this communication, because everyone always talks about social media as if it's something that keeps us apart, that it's in some sense a delusion of our age, that people are locked into their phones and actually separated from one another. But actually, for me, it's been one of the great things in feeling this conversation about food really is a conversation, because I love sharing recipes. It's how do I say this without sounding completely sort of, I don't know, sort of new age, pretentious, but
Go on.
It's a sort of privilege to be in people's homes and to be part of that mesh that creates a family story, that become part of the food that is cooked on special birthdays and just trying to get supper on the table on a weekday. And that's really wonderful. But when these days, because of Instagram and Twitter and so forth, when people do my recipes and I can see the food they've cooked, and it really does become
that
a
feeling must be
communication,
fantastic.
and I love that.
That hundreds or thousands on any one day are actually cooking one of your recipes and then putting it up. And you do have time to see it. 1.1 million
Sometimes
followers.
I'm a bit behindhand on
There's a lot
all
of
the.
people.
I'm a bit behindhand at the moment. I do try and respond to as many people as possible. And on Twitter, it's kind of easier because it's in a, you know, one path, in one little scrolling path that I can follow. I mean, obviously, I can't answer everyone, but I try and answer when I got something helpful to say, like if someone wants a recipe or a question about a recipe. I think that the only time I get a bit sort of shirty and bad-tempered is when someone says, will you tell your social media, person to, and I say, I am my social media person. But I think people know, one, because it sounds like me, and also because occasionally I forget to do recipe of the day or do it really late. And
you do recipe of the day as well. I thought that might have been someone outsourced and you were the, oh my God, I've just found the best.
So it's all arranged.
Oh, yeah.
We arrange it beforehand, and then I have to do on the website, and I have to do the link. I do the link every day and put it up there, and obviously I suddenly think, it's 2 p.m. and I haven't done recipe of the day yet, because it's very, very confusing when I'm on
social media
now.
guilt.
Do I stay? I'm staying on UK time when I post it now, because I feel that for some reason I can do that then, because I do it in the evening here, and I'm just can't remember what day I've posted or anything.
Fantastic. So people imagine an enormous team. What things we'd be surprised to find that you actually do, that everybody thinks, oh, well, someone must do that for her?
God, I think I do quite a lot of it. I'm really, now, how do I would say that I'm very hands-on. People who get irritated might say I was a control freak. But as far as I'm concerned, I really need to be in, at all times. So, obviously I do the recipes and I do the testing.
Oh, now I'll put this down because you actually do a lot of hands-on with the book as well.
Completely. So, well, I've worked with the same designer forever, and it's a very good working relationship, and she's extraordinarily talented. And like a lot of very talented people, she doesn't have an overbearing ego. So she's very open to my saying, oh, can we change the font colour? I want to, so for example, this font is charcoal, dark charcoal, not black. I really envisaged this sort of terracotta